For over a century, the institution had been a breeding ground for senators, corporate executives, and federal judges, much in the same way that other schools produced graduates struggling with student debt. Miss Brianna Cole adjusted the strap of her leather portfolio as she climbed the academy's grand entrance steps. The early morning sunlight cast a warm glow on her defined curls, giving her a quiet aura of determination. At 33, with degrees from Howard and Columbia, she had earned this position, despite the skepticism at her interview and the barely concealed shock when she was chosen for the role. "Remember why you're here," she whispered, tightening her grip on her portfolio. Inside the Grand Assembly Hall, Headmaster Whitmore addressed the faculty, delivering the same speech he likely recited every year, about tradition, high academic standards, and shaping tomorrow's leaders. Brianna nodded along, noticing how she stood out among her colleagues. A few offered tight smiles, others avoided looking her way altogether. "And now, let's welcome our newest faculty member," Whitmore announced, his voice echoing off the walls. "Miss Brianna Cole, who joins our literature department from Westbridge Academy in Chicago." A smattering of polite applause followed. What went unmentioned was her award-winning research in literary theory or the influential curriculum she had developed. Still, Brianna smiled. Later that morning, she arranged her classroom carefully, placing books in neat stacks and hanging a series of posters. Langston Hughes beside Shakespeare, Maya Angelou next to Hemingway. A message, not just decor. The warning bell chimed, signaling the arrival of students. Brianna's pulse quickened. This was her element. The classroom, the books, the chance to challenge young minds. Then came him. Ethan Davenport strode, and like he owned the place. His uniform, perfectly tailored, bore an embroidered family crest. He flung his monogrammed leather backpack onto a desk with careless ease. Confidence, or entitlement, oozed from his every move. His father, Senator Richard Davenport, had just announced his candidacy for governor, and the family name adorned an entire wing of the school library. Ethan's sharp green eyes swept the room, pausing briefly on Brianna. Surprise flickered across his face, followed by something else. Amusement. He muttered something to a friend, who snickered. Brianna ignored them. "Welcome to advanced literature," she said, her voice unwavering. "I'm Miss Cole." Ethan raised a hand, but didn't wait for permission to speak. "Are you sure you're in the right room? We were supposed to have Dr. Holloway this year." The room stilled. 22 pairs of eyes turned to Brianna, waiting. "Dr. Holloway retired last semester," she replied calmly. "I'll be leading this class now. And you are?" "Ethan Davenport," he said with an easy smirk, as though the name alone should suffice. "Well, Mr. Davenport, I look forward to getting to know you and all your classmates. Now, let's begin." By the end of the first week, most students were engaged. Brianna's passion for literature was contagious, and her questions forced them to think beyond the text. But Ethan remained a problem. He arrived late, dismissed discussions, rolled his eyes at readings that veered outside the traditional Western canon. Then, one afternoon, he pushed too far. "Miss Cole," he said, arms folded as he leaned back in his chair, "why are we spending so much time on, diverse literature? Shouldn't we be focusing on real classics?" Brianna took a steady breath. "William Faulkner won the Nobel Prize for Literature, Mr. Davenport. He's about as classic as it gets." Ethan smirked. "Right. It's just hard to keep up these days. The school seems to be hiring a lot of," he paused deliberately, "new kinds of teachers." Silence. Even his friends shifted uncomfortably. Brianna set down her marker. "Mr. Davenport," she said, her voice measured, "if you have concerns about my qualifications, we could discuss them after class. For now, please turn to page 15. But Ethan wasn't done. "My father says Ravenswood is dropping its standards to meet quotas." Brianna met his gaze. "I assure you, Mr. Davenport, I exceeded Ravenswood standards, just as I expect you to exceed mine." The bell rang. As students gathered their things, Brianna spoke again. "Mr. Davenport, stay behind." Ethan lingered in the hallway, arms crossed. "Are you going to call my dad? He's in D.C. all week, and my mother's in Paris." Brianna studied him for a moment. No, Ethan, I have one question for you. Why is it so important that I don't belong here? For the first time, Ethan hesitated. Before he could answer, the hall flooded with students. We'll continue this conversation, Brianna said. For now, have a good weekend. Fresh start on Monday. Determined to reach him, Brianna designed a new project, Lost Narratives, the story's history overlooked. Each student would research and present on an extraordinary figure whose contributions had been ignored or erased. Ethan objected immediately. So now English class is about social justice? Literature and history are deeply connected, Brianna replied. Understanding whose voices were amplified or silenced matters in every text. Ethan scoffed. This is ridiculous. You want an alternative? She asked. 15 hours of volunteer work at the Oak Ridge Community Center. Then present your findings. Ethan laughed. That's across town. My parents would never allow it. I volunteer there myself. It's safe. His smirk faltered. And if I refuse? Then I report your ongoing behavior to the headmaster. His jaw clenched. Fine. Ethan expected to breeze through his hours unnoticed. Instead, he met Jordan, a 14-year-old chess prodigy who couldn't afford tournament fees. He met Ava, a 9-year-old math whiz who had never owned a brand new textbook. He met teens struggling to craft college essays, without the tutors and counselors he had always taken for granted. For the first time, Ethan saw beyond his privilege. He saw talent without opportunity, and it changed him. On the day of his presentation, Ethan took a deep breath and stepped to the podium. My privilege isn't just wealth, he began. It's having teachers who believe in me. The greatest privilege is having someone challenge you to be more than your assumptions. As applause filled the room, he turned toward Brianna. I was wrong about you, he admitted. Brianna smiled. I knew you'd figure that out. As the semester unfolded, Ethan's transformation became undeniable. He arrived on time, engaged in discussions, and even defended the inclusion of non-traditional authors in the curriculum. The boy who once dismissed diverse perspectives now debated passionately about their significance. His classmates noticed, his friends noticed, and most importantly, he noticed. Brianna never asked him about his shift in attitude, nor did she need to. Growth wasn't always about grand declarations. Sometimes it was about the subtle rewiring of a person's worldview. On the final day of class, as students packed up, Ethan lingered behind. Miss Cole, he said, shifting his weight. This class, it made me think differently. Brianna simply nodded. That was always the goal. A small smile played on Ethan's lips. I guess you really did belong here after all. Brianna chuckled. I never doubted it. As he walked out the door, she watched him go. Not as the arrogant student who had challenged her authority, but as a young man learning to challenge his own assumptions. Some lessons weren't just about literature. Some lessons shaped the kind of person you became. And that was the kind of teaching that truly mattered.